Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day. Wherever you are in our international community, welcome to our Zoom workshop. My name is Herb, and I'm an alcoholic. Sobriety date February 21st, 1984. Been at it for a while. And we have a real opportunity today, again, as some of you know, to co-facilitate a discussion on forgiveness. The co-facilitator with me will be Dr. Fred Luskin. He is a PhD doctor, clinical psychologist from Stanford. He did his doctoral dissertation on forgiveness 40 years ago and then converted it to a book for the people like ourselves who are not necessarily trained in psychology and or spirituality. It's a book for the lay people, and he calls his approach secular. The magic of being with Dr. Luskin, from my standpoint, is I come from a spiritual standpoint. I come from a 12-step standpoint. Those are synonyms in my world. They may be complementary in your world. It doesn't make any difference. It is a spiritual human development based on history and lots of traditional approaches to transformation, not the least of which, of course, is the 12-step methodology, which is, full disclosure, my passion and my experience. Dr. Luskin calls his approach the secular approach, in contrast to the spiritual. The secular. He's a scientist. As a scientist, he cannot bring in immaterial, invisible, spiritual terminology. But part of the recognition for both of us back 30 years ago when we were on a common panel on forgiveness was that the process and the dynamic of forgiveness is the same, absolutely the same, no matter how you approach it. The vocabulary, the description is different. And he has a unique way of approaching it in terms of his personality and his experience, as do I. So our work is totally identical and complementary with different names and different words that for each of the steps and each of the processes and the methodology overall. The Mary and Joseph Retreat Center has offered for many of the years that I've been doing this work to support my work and the general work of the 12-step community, big supporters of the 12-step community. It's located physically here in Southern California, actually a mile from my house. And it's a ecumenical retreat center. Melissa is a representative from the retreat center, and we'll give you a description of that. They support us in terms of the administration of the Zoom call and all the registration and all of the stuff that I don't like to be involved in, and they do it really well. So Melissa, would you introduce yourself and the retreat center and then toss it back to me, please?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all time zones present. My name is Melissa. I'm here to represent the Mary and Joseph Retreat Center. This is our 60th anniversary, and we are celebrating this milestone that the sisters have started here. Our retreat center, it's about 8 acres, and it's full of lush gardens, and we sit here on top of this peninsula overlooking the Los Angeles basin. And on our retreat center, we have hotel-like style bedrooms. I'd like to say it's a little bit like the Hilton, but a little less of the hustle and bustle, where you could just be with God and meditate and just breathe in the serenity of the grounds. Also, as you know, we are having on June 14th, that weekend, we are having Herb and Joe B. They're having a weekend retreat, the Design for Living Awakening. So if you haven't registered yet, please register. We invite you. That way you could just see what our retreat center is like. You know, the sisters have worked so hard, prayed so hard to have people to come here to be with God, to be able to reflect, to renew, and just to rest. And that is the theme of this 60th anniversary. So we invite you. And Herb is such an he has an outstanding background. And I will throw the flowers. I will. You gave it to me. I'm going to throw it. So, Herb has more than 40 years of human resource consulting, an extensive amount of active participation in 12-step fellowship, a graduate education in psychology, 7 years in Claretian seminary, and he has spiritual awakening book, three of them, which we have here in our Heavenly Bound bookstore. So, give it up for Herb. Thank you, Herb, for giving us your time, talent, and treasure. And I'd like to thank all of those here that are online supporting the retreat center. And I want to wish all the moms online happy Mother's Day. And if we can just have 1 minute of just a moment of silence for Sister Julia Costello, who recently passed. She
Uh-huh.
was a Yes, she passed a few days ago, earlier this week, and
Mother.
she's a spiritual director here, and she was also one of my spiritual directors. So if we can just take a moment of silence for that. Okay, thank you so much. Back to you, Herb.
Thanks, Marisa, and for Marisa for your introduction and your generosity in supporting us, as well as the information concerning Sister Costello. I didn't know that. She was one of the big providers of support for the 12-step community. My wife discovered sobriety there 41 years ago, and we began our journey. She died 6 years ago, and life is in session. This is a non-Catholic retreat center, even though it's owned and run by a group of Catholic nuns. It's an ecumenical, meaning y'all come, no matter what your orientation, tradition, religion. It's 8 acres at the top of the peninsula, as was just announced, and the physical retreat is the first physical retreat I've done since COVID, and I'm co-facilitating that with Joe from Australia. Joe's been an advocate of the 12-step workshop process, and supporter of mine for the last 15 years, does her own work, now has her own workshops, and does a lot of work on Zoom, is in a different 12-step program. All right. Rainey, talk to us.
Thank you, Herb. My name is Rainey. I'm a food addict. Welcome, everybody. We're just so glad you're here with us today. I have a few administrative announcements to make before we get started. I want to thank Nan and Lisa, who are helping with co-hosting today. I'm so grateful for their service. I'd like to mention just a few technology tips. During the Q&A sessions, if you would like to speak directly to Dr. Luskin or Herb, raise your Zoom hand and they will call on you in order of appearance. The hand icon is located at the bottom of the screen under reactions. We will be using spotlighting today. If you put yourself on speaker view, you will see enlarged pictures of the presenters and the people they are interacting with. During slide presentations, you can adjust the size of the slides on your screen. Click on the gray line between the slides and the photos of the presenters, and you can drag it to the left or to the right, expanding the side you prefer to see more clearly. If your internet connection is unstable, it's a good idea to turn off your video. Please keep yourself on mute. And keep an eye on the chat. I'll be posting helpful information, including email addresses, websites, resources, flyers, upcoming events, and books mentioned during the presentation. For those of you who aren't familiar with the process, to access the PDFs, click on the PDF icon in the chat and it will automatically download to your computer. You will then be able to print the document if you wish. If you have any questions or immediate administrative or technical issues, please send a private chat to me, Rainey. I'm also available by email. The address is on my picture. And I will turn it back to Herb now. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rainey. The slides, the slides that I use are made available to Rainey, and she'll respond to you in whatever way you want. This is recorded and that'll be edited and made available in some fashion. I don't pay much attention to all of the details of that. But again, Rainey and Nan and Lisa would be contacts for that information. And Rainey just said something about the PDF. I do have and I'll send it to Rainey, a meditation on forgiveness that I do believe will be a wonderful synopsis of whatever Dr. Luskin and I say in terms of the description of the methodology and the experience and the process of forgiveness. It's a long meditation. It's very dense, but it will articulate for you or remind you of or give you some information about the process. And I've just made a note to send that out to Rainey. So I'd like to warm up with a overview of at least my understanding and experience with the forgiveness process. I came to it through the 12-step process, not knowing anything about forgiveness, literally, theoretically, or formally or informally, and actually not experiencing it. It was much later, after I had finished the 12-step process, that I was aware of the forgiveness as a process. It was after I finished my 9th step. I was 5 years sober. I had waited, not because I intentionally waited, but because I unconsciously didn't know that I didn't know. And at about 4 years of sobriety, was introduced to a man who did know. And he knew that I didn't. And I asked him for help and he gave me help. And I went through the process of the 12 steps and I finished the 9th step. I'm hoping you're hearing this. It's not the model. It's just my experience. I finished the 9th step. And then I became familiar with the forgiveness as an academic process, thanks to Fred Luskin. And I look back over my journey through the steps for that year that it took me to do steps 1 through 12 in my 5th year of sobriety. And I saw that the process was the same. And that's when I became conscious of the connection of human development and spiritual development as flip sides of the same coin. This man who took me through the steps at 5 years of sobriety quoted Einstein. The consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. He knew that I didn't know. And that if I paid attention to his direction and took the action that he suggested from his own experience, that then eventually I would know. He suggested that I have an open mind and an open heart to a new experience. Some of you have been aware of the set-aside prayer, but it's not a formal prayer. It's not an official prayer of any kind. It's words that represent an attitude. And I'm inviting you out loud or quietly, or not at all, but just holding the commitment to an open mind and open heart to listen as we pray. Spirit of the universe, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, forgiveness, and my path to freedom for an open mind and a new experience with myself, forgiveness, and my path to freedom. You may not be used to seeing those two words in the context of this conversation, forgiveness and freedom. It's the total point. And oh, by the way, it's the total point of the 12-step process. Freedom from addiction, the promise, it's quite frankly, from my standpoint now, 40 years later, looking back over my shoulder, it's the minimum promise. Oh, for some of you, it might be like heaven, utopia, maximum freedom from addiction. Stay with it. Once you get the freedom from addiction, which is promised by page 84 in the big book, placed in a position of neutrality, once you get that and then continue the journey, we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. Then you'll find freedom from unmanageability. I've begun saying that bravely and from the rooftops in the last 3 years. Freedom from unmanageability. It's not in the big book phrased that way, and you certainly won't hear it much in the meetings. Freedom from unmanageability. You don't have to live a life of unmanageability. The total point of 10, 11, and 12 is to manage your life with the tools that were given in a 12-step program. So ask yourself these questions. Do you hold them, whoever they are, mothers, bear with me. I've got a phone call coming in on another line for another set of people upstairs. Will not be interrupted again. Do you hold other people, parents, siblings, children, bosses, spouses, partners? Do you hold them responsible for your current suffering? Whoever them are. It's not an accusation, it's a challenge with this set-aside attitude. What's your attitude toward life, toward other people? I'm going to add to that. What's your attitude toward yourself? Are you beating yourself up because of your current suffering? Self-forgiveness is on the table here today, right now in our conversation. And I will specifically ask Dr. Luskin to talk about that. Do you continue to blame life, events, people, your history, or even yourself for your current suffering? These are the negativities that continue to undermine our sanity and certainly our serenity. See, Bill built the 12 steps because of the bondage of addiction, but fortunately, he said more than he knew. He wrote more than he understood in the big book. At least that's my perception and conclusion. Perhaps an inspired book by the energy of the universe, becoming a prophet and a mystic. Bondage of addiction, of course, precipitated the 12-step process, but Bill said we enter the world of the spirit when we finish the 9th step. And we discover the bondage of unmanageability, the bondage of self-centeredness. Forgiveness. Look it up in a dictionary. No. That's an assignment. I'm not today, not right now, or you're welcome to do that. Of course, you've got the technology to look it up right now on Google. I haven't done it, so I'm not sure what Google will say, but I know my dictionary said a decision, look at my hand, a decision to release. If you have that image in your mind, then it will really help you understand the words that I'm using, the experience that I'm sharing, and Dr. Luskin's research. Release. I make a decision to release them, and paradoxically, I am released. The St. Francis prayer said, when we forgive them, we are forgiven. The Lord's Prayer says, 2,000 years earlier, when we release them from their debt, we are released from our debt. I'm just saying, explore it. Nothing I say is gospel, nothing I say is science, nothing I say it has any validation from any academic source, but it certainly has 100% validation from other people's experience who have had the ability to, and the gift of, and the humility to surrender to the process. A decision to release. A decision. Well, as the third step clearly says it's a decision to turn, in contrast to the second step, which says it's a choice. That's a conversation for a different day, which I could elaborate on for probably an hour. The difference between steps 2 and 3. Step 2 has no connotation of action, just the definition of faith. And step 3 has the connotation of action, a decision, an act of my free will to commit to doing steps 4 through 9, a commitment to action, so that I can identify that there's no floor, there's no ceiling, there's no wall. This was startling and embarrassing to me. Many of you have done the work and have had the experience of, oh my God, it's me that created the bars, that's clutching the bars. I'm looking through a very limited perspective, and I need a new pair of glasses, because all I need to do is release the bars and they will fall to the ground, because the bars are there created by me and held there by me. Releasing the bars, the benefit of steps 4 through 9, and the promise of 10, 11, and 12. Dr. Berger and I just got back, and you may have heard some conversation about that. From London, we did a 3-day conference there. We were keynote speakers from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for 3 hours each day. Recorded on his website, I believe, or at least available in some fashion that maybe Randy can identify. Do I want a sense of well-being, emotional sobriety, the promise after physical sobriety? Do I want to be free of negativity in my life? Yes. This is the promise, walking in the sunlight of the Spirit. Well, its approximation is in the promises at the end of step 5, page 75, walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe, and then it's confirmed as an absolute promise on page 84 and 85 when we enter the world of the Spirit, walking again on level ground in the sunshine of the Spirit. That's what we're looking at. But we have to go through the, what is it? I see this walking over hot coals, if you will, is the image that comes to my mind of the 4th step, the rite of passage from childhood to adulthood, Bill says in step 6 and 7, in the 12 and 12. Looking at our delusional beliefs, looking at the lie that we believe to be the truth. The lenses we have are distorted, and we don't know they're distorted. I don't really know who I am at age 48 years old, 5 years sober. No, I mean, I had lots of psychological training, as well as philosophical understanding, as well as therapeutic approach, as well as 4 or 5 years in AA, daily meetings, daily conversations with a sponsor. Wouldn't you think I'd have a sense of, well, you would have thought incorrectly, because I didn't. And once I began unpacking column 3 in a way that made sense, not because the big book describes it in any easy way, or that my sponsor had any understanding of it, but this step guide did. He helped me see that my self-esteem was delusional. My evaluation of other people was based on fear and anger and a history of shame. And my whole relationship with life was built on shoulds. I should, you should, they should, life should. Wives should, parents should, bosses should. And I didn't know that I didn't know that should was all a myth and a lie. And this was the beginning of the parting of the curtain that allowed me to see reality as it is. You talk about emotional sobriety, seeing reality as it is rather than seeing reality as I am. And then going to that fourth column in which I actually got underneath to my motives. The Latin word movere, what moves us. That's where the term, English language term of motive comes from. What moves us? What am I thinking? Well, I was blasted out of my complacency by pages 60 to 62, where Bill describes selfishness and self-centeredness. I had never seen that. 5 years sober, going to book studies and step studies and being what I thought was a person committed to the big book. But I didn't know, and I couldn't read it on my own until this man helped me look at my behavior to understand my thoughts, to look at my behavior, to understand my feelings, to look at my behavior, to understand my principles, to look at my behavior, to understand my character, to look at my behavior, to understand who I was, working my way backwards from my behavior. My feet tell me the truth. My head and my heart may lie to me. Today, less, because I'm conscious. I'm conscious of my fears. I'm conscious of especially my dishonesty, my go-to position. Fight, flight, and freeze. Freeze, dishonesty, camouflage. Bill has us unpack those. The exact nature, he asks us in the big book as he enters into, on page 64 and 65, he enters into the step 4 inventory. He doesn't ask us to make a list of all of our guilt and shame. Doesn't even use those words. But he does ask us to get to the exact nature. No, I'm quoting. The exact nature underneath our anger and resentment. The exact nature underneath our fear and anxiety. The exact nature of our sex behavior and our dishonesty. Shame's not in the big book, but it's now in my vocabulary an emotion equivalent to anger, fear, and shame. Those 3 reactions to our instincts of fight, flight, and freeze. But the key question in that 4th column that turned me around, using Byron Katie's terminology from Loving What Is, is what's my role? What's my responsibility? Check it out. The 2nd paragraph on page 67, the conclusion to the instructions on resentment, how to unpack them. These are the 5 questions that I see in that paragraph. What is my role? What is my responsibility? Notice it doesn't say what is my part. Nowhere in the big book does it say, what is your part? And yet you hear it in the rooms all the time. I understand the spirit of it. I understand the misunderstanding of it. I don't have a part in my resentment. Please hear this. Take it seriously. I'm deadly serious. I don't have a part in my resentment. My resentment is mine 100% because it's my reaction to people and events and circumstances. Not people, events, and circumstances. People, events, and circumstances can't make me angry. Whoa, that's headline news. Nope. Nobody can make me angry. Nobody can make me feel badly. Nobody can make me fear. Sorry. My reaction to people and circumstances and events is 100% my responsibility. And when I had that insight and that experience, I began to not be a victim anymore. I took 100% responsibility for the life that I had at that particular moment. Oh, there's lots of explanations, but there's no excuses. Lots of explanations. I got some in therapy. Very helpful. But no excuses. I'm 100% responsible. This is when we begin to release people, circumstances, and events. And there's a powerful prayer that's very misunderstood in the big book, pages 66 and 67. Make notes. Don't be looking at your big book right now. At least that would be my recommendation. Just listen to my sort of sharing my knowledge and my experience right now. It'll change your life. I'm not being I'm a salesman by trade and preference, but this is not selling you. This is attempting to explain to you an experience of freedom. Pages 66 and 67. Deep resentments are a killer, and we can understand them, we can talk about them, we can confess them, we can take responsibility for them. We just can't remove our deep resentments, it says in the big book, and we need God's help. So it asks us to pray. Now you hear it all the time. Pray for them. I understand it. It's a story in the back of the big book. It's part of religious traditions and other traditions. It's wonderful. It's very spiritual. It's just not the instruction on pages 66 and 67, at least by my interpretation. The big book suggests we pray for ourselves. We identify the list of people for whom we have deep resentment. We begin a prayer practice for our freedom. We pray for us and our healing. We pray that we be released from this deep resentment. It's in between column 3 and column 4. I introduced it here after my comments on column 4. It doesn't matter. But if you want to be free of a deep resentment, pray for yourself, for your healing, that God enters into your heart and your soul and your life and heals this poison, delivers you to a freedom from this anger that you hold, that you've nurtured, that you've grown, that you're invested in. You're not condoning or approving. You're not giving any sense of benefit to the other person. You're allowing yourself to release this heartburn, this heartache, this gut-churning resentment that puts us in jail, the bondage of self, when we pray for intervention. Now, are there other things the big book suggests? Of course. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, those are not for the faint of heart. Forgiveness is a process, a decision to release them and to be released. It's a paradox. I said it earlier on in my comments in the St. Francis prayer and the Lord's Prayer. It's a paradox. It doesn't seem to make any sense. When I release them, I'm released. When I forgive them their debt, my debt is forgiven. In the broadest of senses, I'm using words poetically here, not scientifically. Please release yourself from any rigidity about the literalness in some fashion. Now, it's not that I understand any of this. I use clumsy, clunky words to express an absolute experience. There is no residual here for my father, my bosses, my wife, any historical harms that I actually did experience. It wasn't a fantasy. I was a victim. It's not a fantasy. It happened. I don't want to be cavalier about especially trauma, which is a big issue these days, and correctly so. I'm not being cavalier, but I'm saying it's unfortunate. Great word. A gift from somebody else who had gone through this work. My history, your history, in some areas is unfortunate. Please don't take this as confrontational or rude. Deal with it. It's not about condoning. You can see the words: ignoring, approving, minimizing, denying. Nope, not even surrendering justice. One of my people I worked with put his dad in jail for molesting his daughters. This man went to prison at age 66 for 6 years. Because this man whose daughters had been molested was not going to suggest to his daughters that what grandpa did was all right. It wasn't all right. He loves his father. He has a good relationship with his father after he got out of prison. But his dad grandpa needed to pay the price of his mischief. Forgiveness is a process. It's a decision to not retaliate, exact revenge, seek compensation, or judge. A decision to release them. Now, Fred probably is, hopefully, going to talk about self-forgiveness and our being released, releasing myself and being free. We've talked, he and I, on prior conversations where we've co-facilitated this workshop that's been recorded, that's on YouTube. I have a very robust YouTube channel with 9 or 10 playlists. One of them, workshops like this, where I co-facilitate a subject with somebody else. And Fred and I have done 3 or 4 that are edited and on that. All about the broader dynamic of the forgiveness process. And just recently, we've begun to focus on self-forgiveness. And today I'll encourage him to spend some more time on that. That step 8 is so important. I needed help with it. I could not do any of the steps on my own, but I know that step 8 and 9 were the critical steps. I needed guidance from experienced people. Who did I harm? I use the word diminish. What did I do to see the behavior? So many people get confused. When you ask them what was the harm, they start talking about what they did. No, what I did is not the harm. What I did is what I did. The impact of what I did on other people is my diminishment of them, my harm of them. What was the harm? What was the negative impact on them? And then getting clear on the harm, I needed help with that so that my subjectivity didn't mitigate my responsibility. And then I was able to get clear on how can I repair the damage. I can't change history, but I can address it. Most of the people were very grateful to me that I even acknowledged it, and then suggested ways to perhaps balance the scale of justice. Chuck C. in New Pair of Glasses, one of the old timers here, at least on the West Coast, said step 9, 8, and 9 is about balancing the scale of justice. You say Lady Justice with the blindfold holding the scales. Action. This is what repairs the damage. What am I willing to do specifically not the general, not the New Age concepts of our responsibility to the universe. I don't believe in that language at all. I have a responsibility specifically to the people that I harmed. Dead people, how do you make amends? I did. Missing people, how do you make amends? I did. People that you shouldn't find, people that you can't find, how do you make amends? I did. Because I got guidance from a man who had made all of those amends. How do you make amends for infidelity to a spouse that you're living with, or actually not even living with, or a partner that you're living with or not living with? I did. And healed that relationship at 25 years of marriage and 7 years of sobriety. And when she died, we had 52 years of marriage, 35 of which was a blessing, and friendship. How does that happen? How do you get here from there? That's not possible. And yet it's absolutely my experience. And the big book has some specific suggestions which require some interpretation. If they don't know, do you tell them? My interpretation through my guide was no. If they know in a general way, what's the big book saying? Tell them in a general way, even though they may want to know all the specifics. No. That's the big book interpretation that I was given, and that worked for me. And the third recommendation is, if they know specifically, do you tell them specifically? And the big book is pretty clear. I'm going to paraphrase it. Try to avoid the conversation. It's not going to be helpful. Pray. And my wife and I prayed in the amends process to change me and to release ourselves. And we got on our knees and we held hands and we looked in each other's eyes. And the first morning I prayed out loud for healing and guidance. The most intimate and intimidating act I've ever done. Getting on my knees and holding hands and looking her in the eye and praying out loud. And the next morning she got on our knees and we held hands and we looked in each other's eyes and she prayed out loud for guidance and healing. And within a week of doing that, we realized the heat began to dissipate. And we continued that practice for 3 years on a daily basis and reconciled our marriage and created a friendship. But the 9th step is very clear, at least in the process that I've experienced. And this is the conclusion to the forgiveness process. Acknowledge that harm done. That was one of the most healing pieces of it, is to face the people that you've created harm with, either face to face or on the telephone or in some fashion of maybe writing. Or if you can't find them or you shouldn't find them, perhaps a prayer practice. And then have the courage to ask, is there anything else that I have done that created harm to your life, that diminished your life, that distracted you from your happiness and from your joy? And then be quiet and allow them to speak their piece if they have something in their heart that they need to share. Acknowledging is one thing, and then they're acknowledging it is quite another. And having that conversation takes an awful lot of courage on both parts. And then suggesting, what are the actions to repair that damage? Suggesting, notice that word, not telling them what you're going to do, but suggesting this is my approach to it, and asking them, is this appropriate? Is this helpful? Is there anything else I can do to balance the scale? This is the conclusion to the forgiveness process as I've experienced it in the 12 steps. As part of my meditation on this process, it came to me, a forgiving person has no past. An unforgiving person has no future. And Bill says that. Resentment is the #1 killer. Resentment being the root cause of the forgiveness response in ourselves. Do we want freedom from those bars that held us in bondage of unmanageability, the bondage of self-centeredness? Freedom. This is the key word, my daily practice. It's a commitment to consciousness. Many people in the spiritual and psychological areas describe a gratitude list. Really just having a positive attitude and then having a list on a daily basis that you add to. What are you grateful for? So that you're constantly looking into and through the sunlight of the spirit at positivity. We call it prayer. It's talking maybe to your higher self, maybe to the universe, maybe to God as I don't understand it. I'm powerless over my inclinations and my behavior. Powerless, step 6 and 7, and yet fully responsible. Powerless and responsible. Paradoxes again that are reconciled here. To increase in virtue, that strength and courage that allows us to become decent human beings. I spend more time talking about meditation, recording, and thinking about and reading about meditation as a consciousness practice than any other area of my personal and human development. Bill nails it in step 11. Praying for guidance and power, knowledge and strength, he says, in the step itself. Sought through prayer and meditation. 2 practices, talking to God, listening to God, perhaps. What do we need? I need knowledge, but it's not enough. I had lots of knowledge, lots of head knowledge. You've seen me do this before. This man said to me at 5 years of sobriety, you got a lot of knowledge, Herb. You have a lot of information, but very little transformation. No, that's how he said it. I loved the wording. I hated the implications. You have a lot of academic information that's never been translated through your heart, to your experience, to your feet. You have not changed. Knowledge is not enough. Power is necessary. I need to be effective in the application of the knowledge. My mind is a wonderful human tool, but unless my will, my free will, places me in alignment with reality as it manifests, I'm going to continue to suffer. Mostly this turning that the big book talks about is the turning from self-centeredness to other-centeredness. Step 11, other with a capital O, God as I don't understand it. Other with a small o in step 12. A contribution to the people around me. Helpful actions. And then an accountability for all of these commitments. The key piece of the 12-step process, I see, quite frankly, the key piece to the human process of development is accountability. Whether you call that a friend or a partner or a therapist or a spiritual guide or a step guide or a sponsor, it doesn't matter what you call these people, and maybe more than one for different reasons. To be transparent, to have your insides and your outsides match with regard to what you're thinking and feeling, and especially what you're doing. It's the most important moving piece of all of the 12-step program pieces. Because if in fact you're accountable to an experienced person, you'll be doing all of the moving parts. I used to think meetings were the key until I did the steps. Then I thought the steps were the key, until I realized that even doing the steps, I needed an accountability partner to stay in alignment with reality rather than being hijacked by my own subjectivity. I needed a mirror that was objective, that would risk hurting my feelings to tell me the truth. That's an accountability partner from my standpoint. When I read Dr. Luskin's book, I summarized it along the lines of my own experience from the 12-step process. I have sent it to him. I've incorporated it in the meditation on forgiveness, and I've not heard any resistance from him about it. So I'm assuming he more or less agrees with it in parallel. The first thing in the forgiveness process is to name it. What is my hurt? To understand it. What was my hope? To identify the rules, and he's got a great phrase in his book. I use it all the time now. We all have unenforceable rules. We have a story, we have a script, we have beliefs. We don't know that. They're the lenses through which we look that have been ground by our genetics or our culture or our family of origin or our education. All of these influences have ground the lenses through which we look, but they're distorted. And we don't know they're distorted because they're the lenses through which we look. And we have to identify the unenforceable rules. Unenforceable. Now, those shoulds that I talked about earlier, if you think it, if you say it, if you feel it, you have it. I should, you should, they should, the life should. That's not reality. Reality just is, Byron Katie. Reality just is, but 100% of the time. Oh my God, that's the heart of emotional sobriety. And it sounds so simple until you actually pick it apart consciously. Right now, reality is emerging on an evolutionary basis, second by second by second by second, and we have no control. That's serenity prayer. That's the total point of the serenity prayer. No control. Please hear that. I jettisoned the word control 30 years ago. I used the word influence. I have responsibility to influence my thoughts, my feelings, my behavior, my attitude. But most importantly, it's about accepting responsibility. Accepting that I have exactly the life that I have created right now. That's very confrontational if you're really hearing what I'm saying. Each one of us, you, each one of us right now, sitting where we're sitting or standing where we're standing or walking where we're walking, each one of us has exactly the life that we've created. Not because of circumstances and events and people, but because of our reaction to circumstances, events, and people. And the only way to change it is to take action, a decision to behave differently, and to evaluate the outcomes of our behavior to see if, in fact, I can improve the outcomes or at least minimize the damage. Consciousness is the key. Action unlocks the door. Consciousness is the key. Action unlocks the door. Forgiveness for freedom, a change. In our attitude, certainly. That's why I said it right at the beginning, that set aside open mind, open heart. What freedom it has given me. And quite frankly, humility to the extent that I've been able to respond to it. Humility, that is that relationship with reality as it is. Accepting reality as it is, knowing that reality is not personal. My life is very personal to me. I'm the center of my life. I'm not the center of life, but I am the center of my life. And what I do determines my life, my actions. I got free from alcohol as a gift. a story for a different day. I got free from unmanageability as the gift of my willingness to take the action of the 12 steps. Free from unmanageability. Since 1988, I have managed my life. 5 years sober. Since 1988, I have managed my life in partnership with a power other than myself. And I have found freedom and joy. Read chapter 12 in the 12 and 12. It's about step 12 in the 12 and 12. The theme and the phrase that he uses there is the joy of living. That's going to be my theme for this year. Most of the work I'll do will come from the lens of a joy of living. That's what we have the ability to have. Freedom, the joy. How free do you want to be? How soon? Forgive for good. If you haven't got it, get it. If you haven't read it, read it. If you haven't read it recently, read it again. Second best book I've ever read. I'm saying it unabashedly. I've read many. The first book, if you're curious, is the big book because it's so effective in terms of transformation. But this book, Forgive for Good, parallels the effectiveness and parallels the process with different vocabulary and completely reinforces the journey to freedom. I don't know whether Fred is here or not. I hope he is. Speak up, Fred, if you're here, and if you're not, we'll have some questions meanwhile. So let's go to some questions, and Fred will show up when he does. Oh, and raise your hand through the reaction icon at the bottom. And then I'll call on you in the order of your raised hands. About what I said, not about what Fred wrote. Please wait for him to talk. You can ask him questions after he's shared some of his thoughts.
Fred just arrived, Herb.
Say it again.
Fred just arrived.
Okay, Fred, we're going to just take 5 or 10 minutes of questions. You'll get the feel of it. I've just given a perspective from, as I do, of the 12-step process, especially 4 through 9, of addressing harms done and releasing, being released. And I've emphasized throughout my conversation that you might talk about self-forgiveness today, and you will talk about whatever it is you have on your mind today. So Martin, please.
Hi, Herb. Thank you so much. I'm curious about, when reflecting on ourselves, you said like we're responsible for our reaction to whatever happens.
Yeah.
And then when we're looking at our actions in terms of how they harm others, I wonder how you apply that there, like in terms of harming others. Are they also responsible to how they react to our behavior? So I'm kind of a little bit, maybe I'm resisting the idea of like causing harm. So I just want to have some curiosity about that.
No, you've got great curiosity and wonderful insight. And be very careful here, because we don't want to say, well, don't make your problems my problems just because you reacted to me. No, that would be a bit cold and insensitive. But your insight is great. They are responsible for their reaction. Yes. Now, I wouldn't harp on that. I certainly wouldn't try to teach them that in the moment. That would be kind of a little arrogant and certainly not helpful. So when I'm in the mode of certainly in the amends process, I'm looking through the lens of how can I be helpful to this person so that they're released from any of the negative energy that was generated in our transaction. How can I, in some way, through my words, through my attitude, through my actions, bring them to a sense of being released from that negative energy? Now, I don't have the power to do that, but given the guidance that I received from an experienced person, every one of my amends went really well by my standards. It appeared that they accepted it, and without using the words, more often than not, without using the words, there was a level of release and forgiveness. Some even actually said, you know, I thank you very much for what you're doing. I'm forgiving you, and if I've hurt you in any way, I hope you forgive me, type thing. So yeah, wonderful insight on your part. Just get guidance from whoever gives you guidance that has knowledge and experience, and with your consciousness, you'll not have any negative experience with the process. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, great insight. Thank you. Karen, please.
Hi, Herb. I just had a quick question. I'm actually on step 9 now
Good.
in making my amends. And I'm just having a hard time kind of like how to go about making amends. Like if it's again like my conduct and who I harmed.
Wait, yeah, I know. You're being
But
very, no, you're being very vague.
okay.
No,
I'm just saying.
I'm not asking you to be specific here,
Okay.
but I'm
Yeah.
asking you to be specific with yourself. And
Okay.
are you getting guidance from a step guide or
Yeah.
sponsor?
Yeah. It's just with
So here's the
resentments.
here's the
Okay.
question. Here's the question. It's not about resentment, is it?
Okay.
Well, wait. You just said resentment. Step 8 is not about resentment.
No.
What's it about?
Making a list of who I'm willing to make amends to, of who I harmed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Step 8 is about identifying harms.
Yeah.
Give me an example of a specific harm that you created.
Well, impacts of infidelity or certain things like that.
No. See what you just did? What you just did is what I said is what most people do. When
Okay.
they're asked about harms, they talk about their behavior. Infidelity is your behavior.
No.
That's not a harm.
But loss of trust.
No, what? Are you hearing me?
Yeah.
Infidelity is not the harm.
Yeah.
So what was the impact of you don't have to answer this, but
Yeah.
to me, but to yourself you do. What was the impact of your infidelity on the person with whom that you either had the infidelity with, or the person who you had infidelity on?
Yeah.
So it's the impact of your behavior.
Yeah.
Once you get specific about that, it
Yeah.
allows you to say, oh, so it's in some cases I was guided to not confront the person, not address it with that person, all right, but to pray for their release, for their healing indirectly, because it would have been inappropriate to raise something that was 25 or 30 years old to kind of like pour salt in an old wound.
Yeah.
So, but I'm not giving a formula, and I'm not giving specific advice. I'm just sort of in a general way saying this needs very tender and sacred treatment. Yeah.
As for me, it's just with the resentments that I hold towards people.
Well, but that's your problem.
So I don't have to make amends to people.
Wait. That has nothing to do with the 8th step.
Okay.
That has everything to do with the 4th step.
Yeah.
Your resentments are your problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So deal with it. Find out, why do you have it? What's your perception? Why do you have it? What is your motive? And seeing all of that is wonderful if you can come to the truth. And then realize that prayer practice is what freed me from my deep resentment. I had 8 deep resentments: father, mother, wife, and a coach, and 4 bosses. And I was released because I understood the dynamics in me of my reaction, but I also prayed the prayer for the healing.
Okay.
My healing, not theirs, my healing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because my sponsor gave me to make amends for my resentments to the people I held them towards. I've been having a really hard time with that, and that just solidifies it. So
Yeah. Your resentments are your problem.
Yeah.
The harms you've done to other people is your responsibility to see what you can do. I mean, you can't change history, but you can change in some way your attitude and theirs about the interpretation of history.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for the conversation. All right, I'm gonna take one more and then we'll go to Dr. Fred. Barbara?
It's Barbara Lilly in
Hey.
step. I don't know how to phrase the question, and it's all right, but what happened? I mean, it's an issue of my reaction, which is withdrawal from someone who's hurt me.
Yeah.
And it's not about not forgiving them. I feel I can work that. It's the barriers that go up. So is that just quote unquote prayer work?
Well, wait, what is it you want?
Hmm. Well, if it's someone I no longer trust, I really don't want the relationship.
So don't have it. What is your concern?
Oh, I see. I have a should in here.
There
Okay.
you go. There you go. Yeah. If they're not trustworthy, don't trust them. And if you don't want a relationship with them, don't have one. Oh, that's hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mhm. All right. I'm going to go on now, but we can come
All
back
right.
afterwards. I'll stay as
No,
long as there are
no,
questions. And
that
Doc-
that's pretty straightforward.
most of it is. And now Mr. Straightforward himself, Dr. Luskin, please. How are you, Fred?
Hello, Herb.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for your forward. It's been, adapted and the book has been submitted and it comes out March 1st.
Wow. Next year.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So
So
I'm just telling you, I
I-
edited maybe 5-10% of what you wrote just to put it more in the language of the book, but otherwise it's what you wrote. So thank you.
well, you're welcome. I'm honored. Fred Luskin has a workbook coming out on forgiveness, and
Yeah,
that
called
right a little forward.
Forgive for Recovery. So I asked Herb to write a forward for it. And it was lovely to receive. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I was trying to think of like what I might be able to say that I haven't said before a number of times in front of this group of people. And there was one thing that came to my mind. And many of you know already there's a pretty powerful link between gratitude and creating of resentments. And that's pretty duh. I mean, you don't need a PhD from Stanford to understand that if you have a high sense of thank you, you're going to be a heck of a lot more able to handle the uncomfortable parts of your life. But what people don't understand, and maybe that's not the right word, but this is one of the clear ways of recognizing the inadvisability of taking too much offense is we're always checking out whether or not this universe, our life, has given us enough. We're always doing a kind of algorithm, and I want to be very clear about this. So when you walk outside, and let's say it's raining, and you really wanted it to be sunny, but if you're quite grateful or you've trained yourself to see the good, then the fact that you're not getting what you want with the weather is not a big deal. Like, okay, the weather sucks today. But you have very little momentum for creating a resentment. If you walk outside and don't have a practice of some degree of thank you, then the weather not giving you what you want is another disappointment. So we don't remember this. Like, this is a real lack of education in this world, that everything you take offense at, everything, every day that you take offense, is at some degree a question of, was the world loving, kind, generous, good enough for me? So that at this moment, I don't need to be resentful towards it. And that happens every day, a kind of global assessment. Have I been given enough love? Have I had enough abundance of food and shelter and opportunities? And have I had enough chance to be healthy? Have I whatever? But what we don't realize is that we are always keeping score. And if you wake up in the morning bitchy, like we all do, it's because you decided the good guys don't have enough score. And therefore, you give yourself permission to be bitchy. Like, wait, I haven't gotten enough good. I haven't been loved quite enough. I haven't seen enough beauty. There hasn't been enough kindness. There haven't been enough people who have been forgiving of me. So I'm not going to offer generosity to this world because I haven't gotten enough. When we practice a heck of a lot more thank you, that asset deficit balance changes. And we have much less of a reason to continue our unhappiness. Almost none of us recognize this, and almost none of us take responsibility for our gratitude impairment, which leads us to have such a bitter view about life and leads us to be so unforgiving. If we paid attention a little more to how much we're forgiven, I mean, one of the things that, I mean, I've been teaching for a long time, and I keep on trying to find new ways to say the same thing, because if I use the old ways all the time, I get bored out of my mind. So in order to preserve my sanity, but this has been one of the subcurrents that I have been thinking about now for years, that we don't recognize that every single day we're doing a kind of asset deficit accounting. And if we come up with the assets weren't enough, then the deficits seem really big. And there's no reason to be a nice human being, because it ain't looking too good. So one of the practices that are not even practices, I gave a talk 2 days ago, I think, in Mill Valley, a community in the Bay Area here in Marin. And it was a lot of, pretty affluent people who seemed to be doing well in life. And I would ask them, like, basically, do you realize if you're partnered or married or with somebody, what an absolute pain in the ass you are to come home to? Like, do you pay attention to how difficult you are? How many prejudices you have? How much crap you took in as a child that you now share with your partner and family? How grouchy you can be? How many mistakes you make? And if somebody comes home and tries to love you with all that, What an amazing thing. So you want to think about that. Like, what an amazing thing that somebody can put up with you. Just like you know how much you've put up with your partner and your best friend and your parent and even you grown children. You know the cost that being in love, so to speak, is, because you know that you get the loved ones' blessings and their annoyances. You get them both. But the question here is, do you recognize the staggering gift of somebody coming home and tolerating you? Now, if you don't pay attention to that, you have wrong perspective, and it's very hard for you to see life clearly, because you will be so biased from your own projections and your own stuff and your own like fake heroism that we all do about, wow, I put up with that person for 28 years and it was good, but they were also a royal pain, not recognizing that that person's saying the exact same thing about you. But if you want to cultivate the kind of humility that allows you to forgive, you got to pay attention. And not just from our self-referential, aren't we wonderful, all the people who are lucky enough to be with us. We need to see things clearly. And then we do an accounting all the time. You may think you're pissed because like one of your children won't speak to you. And yes, you're right that that's part of why you're pissed. The other reason you're pissed is you haven't figured out that you've gotten enough good to balance it. You haven't paid enough attention. So the error that everybody makes is paying too much attention to the wound and not enough attention to the goodness around it. So we over pay attention to the wound and we tell everybody, you won't believe the bum kid I had. After all what I did for them, they're not speaking to me, or they won't let me see the grandkids, or they're too busy for me. That bum, after all the effort I put forth. There's some truth to that, because none of this is black and white. It's all subtle. It's all both and. People do terrible things and you have and I have so much more control of who we are receiving the wound. That's what we have so much control over. We don't have control to stop them. And I will say, even with that, we're lying to ourselves. I mean this. We're lying to ourselves like rugs, that you lie like a rug, because most, not all, but most people that were in relationship who are not so nice to us, they would be nicer to us if we were nicer to them. Like, this is duh. But it's duh that we don't think about. So if we have a conflicted marriage and we pay so much attention to what's wrong with the partner, and we think of all the ways to make them better, except for maybe I need to treat them nicer, because only a complete moron is nasty to somebody who's nice to them. There are complete morons out there. I mean, it's not like this world isn't filled with morons. But generally speaking, I know most of you, like me, got this as a kid. You catch more bees with honey. So the point I'm making is that there are subtle accountings between our ears that influence dramatically our reactions. The accounting that we almost never do is how difficult we are. That is an accounting that we almost never do. And if you do it, you're more likely to be forgiving. If you also do the accounting of, wow, what do I take for granted? So I did a class this past week at Stanford for graduate students. And one of the exercises that I had them do or think about was somebody says, how's your day? And I said, if you want to be honest with that question, you would have to respond, well, I woke up in a bed. I had food in the refrigerator. I had running water. I was in a place with a stable government. And I had a good deal of freedom to do what I wanted. So all in all, not a terrible day. Now, I can tell you more specifics. But the truth is, I exist, most of us, on a sea of abundance. So when I said to this young, these younger people, so when somebody asks you, how's your day? Try telling them the truth. Try telling them an accurate story that I woke up with an unbelievable amount of opportunity and abundance. I remind these Stanford students, you woke up and you're a student at Stanford. So right there, what a life you have. All I'm getting at is forgiveness comes more readily when we're capable of telling the truth. It comes less readily when we lie to exaggerate the negative and minimize the positive. And it's tough because we're wired to do this. We're wired that way. We're wired to make lots of stress and lots of chaos so we don't relax too much in our lives and allow bad things to happen. It's not like we're deformed and we do this. This is how we were created. So let me do a short gratitude visualization. And any of you have heard me before. I always do some guided imagery. So for this imagery practice, if you would please just put your phones away so you're not distracted by them. And if you're looking at your computer, like close the window which has your email so you're not thinking about it, and close the email which has your stocks or who you're going to bet on in the next race, the horse race, so you're not distracted by it. And allow yourself to like pull back a little bit from the distraction. And then allow your eyes to close. Allow your eyes to close. And allow your mind to go inward. Allow your mind to come inward and allow your attention to come inward. And when I say inward, I mean that if you can bring your attention to what's going on inside of you, or at least in your being, not so much outside. And gentle and slow your breathing. And when you breathe, make sure, if you can, that it's gentle. Because any of you have heard me, it is so helpful to be able to practice safety with your breathing and your meditation. That you want to practice being safe with yourself. And when you inhale, this is all a kind of training. When you inhale, have your abdomen expand. There's nothing unique about this, about belly breathing, but it's important to practice the safety and relaxation of when you inhale, allow the in-breath to expand your belly. And allow the out-breath to contract your belly. This is how we were designed to breathe when safe. This is such an important practice. When you breathe like this, you send signals to your brain and nervous system that you are safe. And then all I want you to do for the gratitude piece is when you inhale the next couple of times, say thank you. Just for that miracle of breath. For that absolute miracle and generosity of breathing. Thank you. And say thank you when you inhale and release when you exhale. Just say thank you when you inhale and very simply and gently thank you when you exhale. No, thank you when you inhale. It's just a nice, very simple, very gentle practice of thank you for the absolute miracle of our lives. And then after one or two more breaths, just very gently open your eyes. So this is so simple. It's so simple. It's so immediate. And the word is, it's simple, but not easy. Because when we connect just a little bit with the miracle of this experience, the absolute miracle of it, then we have the capacity to take the other parts of this miracle, which may not be so pretty and pleasant, that we want to see it clearly instead of highlighting and perseverating around the woundedness endlessly. And it's not that the woundedness doesn't exist, and it's not that many of you haven't been harmed, and it's not that many of you haven't been mistreated, that you have. But now, today, we all have more choice than we like to believe about where we put our attention. So you have some choice about where you put your attention. You have some choice about how much gratitude and humility you put towards your relationships. And you have some choice as to how much beauty you want to open to balance out the inevitable losses and suffering. This is not a kumbaya, everything's great. It's not new agey nonsense. The deep reality is life is filled with a lot of suffering. And our goal is to develop resilience, not like kumbaya nonsense. It's to develop grit and resilience. And that, when I tune in and I listen to her talking about the 12-step programs, or I did spend 1 year in the VA hospital. I'm not as a patient, but as a clinician, um, working, I did my thing as part of 12-step groups for a year. But that's a deep teaching in maturity and seeing things clearly. I mean, because what we hide from ourselves is our bullshit. We just hide that from ourselves, desperately hide from our own behavior. And so a lot of this is speaking similar aims with different language. But it is very, very hard to be willing to see it clearly. And so there's two directions of clarity that I'm talking about. One is the amount of beauty and goodness that is in your life. And two, the amount of forbearance and tolerance that the world has offered you for your idiosyncratic, not so hotsy-totsy behavior. And when you add both of those just a little bit to your mental apparatus, you become more forgiving. Because you realize that it's not just a difficult world, it's a difficult and a beautiful world. And I have been forgiven so many times. That's seeing things clearly. This is not lying to yourself. It's stop lying to yourself. Like, we all have been treated with great forbearance by people, all of us. And we also have been the beneficiaries of generosity. I'm going to tell a story. I'm not a teacher who does a lot of personal sharing, but this is long enough ago, and it was such a shocking, as I was discovering forgiveness. I had a problematic relationship with my mother growing up. And my mother was by no means like, I mean, I'm not claiming that she was abusive or anything, but she had a good number of psychological issues that interfered with everything she did. I mean, that was just who she was. And she had some OCD and a lot of anxiety and just whatever. And so she was a difficult person, but I'm making no claims that like I was I had no trauma. I just had a difficult person. And she didn't abuse me. She was just off in herself. But when I went through adolescence, I had no patience for how off she was. So we started really being at odds, and I was trying to grow up and become independent and whatever. And it was a real mess. And a decade or more later, I'm visiting my mother with my partner at the time. And my mother and I are going at it, and like, I'm giving her grief, and my mother's OCD is like really like there. But so my mother and I are conflicted, and my partner and I go into my bedroom at my parents' house, and my partner looks at me and says, "Fred, what the hell's wrong with you?" I know your mother's a little difficult, but you look like a nutcase. And I said to her, "But didn't you hear her say X, Y, and Z?" She said, "Yeah, I heard every word of it, but then you said X, Y, and Z on steroids." And I looked at her like, my God, what planet are you from? This is a very difficult woman. And she says, "Yeah, she may be, but like, what does that have to do with how crazy you are?" And I didn't stop. That did not stop me. Trust me. Like one person speaking truth to me was not enough to slow that train down. And you all know what I'm talking about. Like you've all had people speak truth to you. You know they're right, and it doesn't even slow the locomotive. That slowed it down a little. Okay. So instead of barreling through at 60 miles an hour, I downshifted the locomotive to 40, but it was still a locomotive. Anyway, I kept some degree of self-righteous negativity. So I didn't look at how nasty I was to my mother. That was the purpose of it. I kept up a running dialogue of all the ways my mother was wrong, and most of them were correct. However, I did it so I would not have to look at my bad behavior. That's why I did it. I start to become interested in forgiveness professionally. And I'm looking up, quotes and stuff. And remember, I'm still really self-righteous about all this. And I come across a quote by the Buddha where they asked, the Buddha, this was thousands of years ago, so it's not like he wrote novels or anything, but it was done in dialogue. So, Buddha, what's the proper attitude to take towards your parents? And I'm willing to read a little bit about the Buddha, tell me that maybe I'm not 100% right, because I was starting to explore forgiveness, but I was floored by what the Buddha is reported to have said. So when the person asked Buddha, "So what's the right attitude toward your parents?" Buddha goes, "If you spent the rest of your life simply trying to repay the kindness Your parents showed you when you were helpless, it would be inadequate. And I'm sitting there thinking, I do not like this, but I know that the Buddha is right. And so I'm sitting there trying desperately to hold on to my anger towards my mother and my sense of victimhood, because that's what it is. I was walking around with all this victim stuff about terrible. I mean, and again, I'm not excusing her behavior. But the Buddha shifted my ship, which is, oh my God, it's not just about how I was treated when I noticed things going wrong, but how much did I notice about when things went right? And how much did I take for granted the generosity? Again, and I'm not excusing bad behavior, I'm talking about seeing things clearly. So because of the Buddha and my partner, I don't know that I 100% forgave my mother, because it had nothing to do with her. It had to be with my stubbornness. I did not want to give up completely my sense that I was right. That's what I recognized in myself, that I loved believing that I'm right. Anyway, due to the Buddha and the estrangement, I wrote my mother a letter. I could not write, I forgive you for everything, like that was not in me. What I could write when I discovered gratitude, I wrote her this: Mom, I'm writing because I just want to let you know that I have a very nice life. I have a loving partner and I have a baby. And I just want you to know that I know that I couldn't have done this without your parenting and what you offered me. And I'm just completing the circle with a profound thank you for whatever you did that allowed me to be in the place that I am now. Now, that's not, full forgiveness, but I wasn't capable of that. What I was capable of, thank you. But here's the kicker. My mother died not that long after that, unexpected. I mean, not unexpectedly, but not expectedly. And when I went back east for the memorial, every one of her friends came up to me and told me how much my letter meant to her. And I can still feel it now. No greatness in me, just thank God I said it before it was too late. Thank God. And the simple power of saying thank you because I finally saw reality. Not because of anything good. I resisted till I was 40 years of age. But the Buddha and having an honest partner forced me to look at what I hadn't wanted to see. And what I hadn't wanted to see was all the goodness that I had covered by my grievance. And I've learned now that much of the work that I'm doing is to try to help people pull back the scales from their eyes of all the ugliness that they have used to cover those eyes, to open up so that they have a more honest and loving perspective about their own life. Let me do one more imagery practice and then I'll stop. And if you want to ask me some questions, I'll be happy to. But let me do one more imagery. If again, you like quiet down for a moment and allow your eyes to close. and bring your attention inward. And relax inside. And quiet inside. And I mean that very gently, quiet and gentle. And have your breathing be soft. And have your breathing open when you inhale. So when you inhale, your abdomen expands. And then it's all I want you to do is just remember a moment, anywhere, anytime, where you knew you were loved. All that way it can be, and it doesn't even mean that you have to have been loved by a person. You could be loved by a dog. But I want you to remember a moment when you were loved, when you knew you were loved. It could be young or old, could be a friend, a parent, a lover, a child. I just want you to remember a moment where you knew you were loved. And then from inside your own heart, please say thank you. Just from inside of you, there's a natural tendency, if we pay attention, to say thank you to anyone, anytime, who has tried to love us. And I'm not even saying they have to have been successful at it. I'm just saying they tried. And then just say thank you. And let it go. And gently open your eyes. Because all I want to remind, and this has been my work now for decades, is trying to remind everyone that our perspective has so much to do with whether or not we're forgiving. what we pay attention to has so much to do with whether or not we're forgiving. It's not just the events. It's not just how much we can say we've been harmed. There's so much, I'm not going to say choice because that is a part of it, but so much opportunity around it. And the part that I think is so important is it's nobody else's fault if we don't take those opportunities. That's the biggest change. Like nobody's going to argue that the people who harmed you, like that they're great or that, you know, but 5 years later or 10 years later or 15 or 30 years later, it's nobody else's fault if we haven't learned how to alter some of our perceptions. And not specifically about what happened, but about life itself. That's why I put this mostly about resilience. It's growing in our capacity to see life in a way that's nourishing for us. And, you know, sometimes it's only this big. This is not, you know, there's no magic cure for life. There's just working at it and practice and practice and more practice. And anyway, I thank you for welcoming me into your group. I am absolutely willing to take some questions. If I can't answer them, I won't. But if I can, I'll do my best. So if you have a question, please ask me.
Great, I'll manage this, and thank you so much,
Good.
Ed, very much. Nancy, please, Nancy G.
Hi, I just first want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. There's a small group of us that meet every week and we're reading Forgive for Good.
Oh,
And loving
wonderful.
it. We're just, and no homework. We're making it easy. We meet, we read a chapter, discuss it. That's it till the next week. And
Thank you.
I am loving this. And
I'm gonna give them two one talk and one podcast that recently came out. I'll send it to Herb and he'll put it on whatever.
great.
But they are about as good an encapsulation of how I think now about this as I've seen.
Yeah.
The talk was, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks ago, and the podcast was around the same, but both of them gave me an opportunity to like express myself in the, you know, the camel work and everything is first rate. So you know, I think you'll appreciate it as part of this group you're using
Thank
because
you.
it would really help, you know, you know what I'm trying to say. So
I do.
it'll be made available to anybody here.
Thanks. And I just want to read a very brief poem that my daughter wrote that when you were talking, I went, oh my God, this is her poem. It's called
Go ahead.
What If Your Life? What if your whole life was a prayer of gratitude and devotion? What if nothing mattered but letting your heart lift toward the heavens? What if, as you close your eyes each night, all you said was, thank you, I love you, and am loved? And you know, it's like she put it on Instagram a million years ago. I printed it off because I loved it, found it recently. And then listening to you, I'm like, and I'm trying to say this every single day because sometimes out of the mouth of babes, you know?
Thank you so much, Nancy.
No,
Thank you.
Nancy, we're all trying to learn the same things.
Yeah. And one other thing, and there may not be an answer for this. I have a few friends, especially one who is holding on to grievances. Every time I talk to her, I feel like she's going to explode. And I've seen her with certain people. And if I didn't know the backstory, I think, oh, this person is a lunatic, kind of what your partner probably felt with you. How can we help these people?
I mean, two things. One, always the simplest answer is practice it yourself before you want to make sure you're helping other people. So that's one. And that's what makes this so tough, because many people sense the insincerity of asking them to do something you can't do.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't tell you how many people have come to me and say, my husband or wife really needs what you're teaching, and it's like, and I'm thinking, I'd struggle if I were married to you too, it's like, but so always the first is practice.
Yeah.
The second is ask them.
Yeah.
Just ask them. Do they want your help? Don't impose it, but ask them.
Mm-hmm.
So those would be my simple answers to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love every time you guys are together. There's this synergy that's magical. Anyway,
Yeah,
thank you so much.
it's energetically, it just works.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Nancy.
Completely.
And for the observation. Kai, please.
Hey, I just wanted to express my gratitude as well. Earlier, Fred, and perhaps Herb, you have an insight on this as well. You spoke to paying attention to how hard of a person it is for me to be around. And I was wondering, is there an antithesis to that? Is there a flip of the coin where I am so hyper focused on how hard of a person I am that I am, I'm hyper focused on my faults. Like, is
Well,
there a line?
that's not helpful at all. To say you see things clearly means you see the yin and the yang. So if you're like a Debbie Downer around yourself, you need practice then in seeing your generosity and good points.
Hmm.
So you could then ask, if you have a partner or best friend or parent, so what do I bring to the party? It's always to see things clearly, but most of us have a harder time with the humility of, I'm not such a gift, even though I have gifts. If you see that, you really are too hard on yourself, then that's in and of itself as cloudy and, opaque as any other distortion. And unfortunately, what we're trying to do is, as best we can, see things in balance. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to make a recommendation, and then I have a question to Fred.
Sure.
The recommendation is reading a book by Nathaniel Branden called Six Pillars of Self-Esteem. It's a book with a little bit of work in it, but mostly it's academic teaching about the ingredients of self-esteem. And recently we did a panel on it. It was really important. But maybe Fred, you're familiar with Nathaniel Branden. His work is really outstanding. That's what. But Fred, you mentioned a couple words in your commentary, and I'd like you to elaborate on two words. One was humility, and the other was positive, but it reminded me of positive psychology, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about that. Humility and positivity.
I mean, humility is like seeing our place in the world honestly. No, that we're an important speck of creation, that we matter, but we have to be careful when we imagine that we matter so much more than everything else.
Good.
And the humility allows us to see our more truthful place in this world, which is, you know, that we exist with a lot of other human beings. And so we want to have some specialness for ourselves, but not be consumed by it. And humility leads to happiness. Like, humility is not what that gentleman was talking about, which is self-criticism. Humility is I'm a normal, flawed person with skills and strengths. And the humility allows us to see other people's strengths and generosity. When we're not humble, we miss the goodness that's around us. That's the value of humility. Positivity is simply like focusing on that part of our repertoire, you know, that you can look and see a little more goodness. You can use your words to talk a little more about what works. You can use your words for more kindness. You can give people the benefit of the doubt. It's a way of being in the world that has hope attached to it, that I can influence myself and other people for the better. It doesn't mean that everything I do will do that, but there's a hope in that. I hope that answers for you, Herb.
Yeah, it does, and it's connected to choice also.
Always.
The choice that I'm going to look toward the light rather than toward the darkness. One of the authors that I read defined humility as truth. Purely and
It
simply,
is.
it's just the truth.
It's just the truth.
All right, thank you. Millie, please.
Thanks, Herb. Thanks, Dr. Luskin. Michael Bernard Beckwith lessons you learned.
Millie, you cut out a little bit. Your Wi-Fi is a little wonky. Go off the picture and it'll strengthen your.
Okay.
Yeah.
Better?
Yes, please.
Better? Okay, thanks. So, but Michael Bernard Beckwith says that true forgiveness occurs when I'm grateful for the lessons, or when we are grateful for the lessons we've learned, right? So based on that, forgiveness would be a result of something that I am letting go of, something that happened in the past. But the way I understand Dr. Luskin, forgiveness is a result of the attitude of gratitude and the attitude of humility, understanding myself and understanding others, and accepting myself and accepting others. So where does that vary?
I don't see
Or is there variance?
I don't see the conflict there, but Fred, what do you think?
No?
You know, I mean, if I take proper humility, none of us fully understand what we're saying.
Okay.
I mean,
Mhm.
you know, I mean, we know something, but we don't know it all by any stretch of the imagination. So if I hint at what leads to to forgiveness, and somebody else hints at it, they may both be true.
Right.
You know,
Okay.
it's like I share my understanding, which I know has value and research backs up, but that doesn't mean it's the only true understanding.
Mm.
So if you have humility, then one of the ways you can express that is by like looking at your past without judgment or grievance. And you can say, with humility, I learned things, which is a very humble experience. I learned from my mistakes.
Yeah.
The one thing I will add, though, is
Mhm.
there's always something to learn when you resolve a grievance, because
Mhm.
what you see is the ways that you couldn't cope with life. And so when you've forgiven, you've learned a little bit how to cope better, which is a wonderful thing, even though it can be really hard.
Yeah.
Thanks. That makes total,
it-
yeah, okay. It makes total sense to me now because
I
it's
tried
the
to link
same,
them.
yes, and it's the same the context, the basis is total the same. But just like you said, it also depends like where am I in my life in this moment, right? And so I can look at an experience either being something of I'm having in this moment or something I've had in the past, but the choice that I make as a result, which then is the lesson I've learned, is what carries me forward.
Exactly.
The connection of choice and freedom, that is my attitude and my reaction.
Correct, Herb.
That's it right there. Yeah.
Thanks,
Wonderful.
Herb.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dr. Luskin.
Thank you. Frankie, please. You're muted. You're still muted. It's maybe Rainey can help. I can't. I'm not competent technology. Oh, there you go.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
You're very unmuted.
Okay, thank you. All right, I really enjoyed the program very much.
Good.
Absolutely everything. But there was one thing I wanted to add, and that was when I became a new believer in Jesus, and this isn't going to be a religious talk, it's going to be about primal therapy. One of the things I thought after I read primal therapy was, gee, how can I confess all the pain I have when it's so suppressed? I don't even know what's down there. I don't even know what I'm feeling. So I went through a process of saving my money, going to primal therapy, and they helped me feel what I could not feel as a child. Then I became more connected to what it was that was done to me in order for me to have perspective and to forgive, because I can see it now. I could also then see the misbehavior and where it stemmed from. But I begin to feel now that feeling the pain and really counting the cost of what was done to you and seeing it gives you so much more greater ability to forgive. I hope that makes sense.
Well, you can't forgive until you know what you're forgiving.
That I think is the issue I'm trying to say. A lot of
Yeah.
people will say you need to forgive, you need to release, and then it becomes such a stumbling block because they haven't really gone through what was really done to them. How do you count the cost?
Yeah.
And then with a facilitator or with your faith, then I think you are more able to see what there is to forgive. But there's
So
so
let
much
me
about
make
forgiveness
this
first.
let me make this really simple. You're talking about grief. You have to go through it.
Yes, and
Which
so
is
that's
good,
what
Molly.
I wanted to make clear.
The one thing that people are hearing you. First, I hear you. You're very clear, and I'm in agreement with it. But other people who are hearing you might be hearing that they need to somehow create a connection to victimhood. And I know that's not what you're saying. You're saying I need to acknowledge that I was a victim, but I'm not going to wallow in it and blame. I'm going to acknowledge it and try to get free of it. And maybe, Fred, you could talk a little bit about trauma, since there's so much conversation around trauma today and healing.
Yeah, I'm not talking about wallowing in it.
No,
I'm talking about finally feeling it.
I got
Connecting it.
exactly what you're saying, but I want to make
Yeah.
sure other people weren't interpreting it in a way that I could hear it could be
Oh,
interpreted. That's
yeah,
all.
right.
My victimhood is an intelligent stopping point for a while. So when we're hurt, the brain, the nervous system, our processing tries all sorts of ways to handle the wound. And one of those ways is victimhood. It wasn't my fault. I'm innocent. Bad things were done for me. It's a place of rest where we can hold the wound without having been responsible. So it's one of the ways that we try to create conditions where we can process what happened. Victimhood becomes a problem when we don't move through it.
Right.
It's not bad in and of itself. So like if your partner leaves you and for 2 months you walk around sucking your thumb, that's fine. But if for 2 years you're sucking your thumb, you're stuck. And so victimhood becomes a problem when we build a story around what happened that's no longer processing or safe, but locks us into a stance where we're not responsible for our feelings and behaviors moving forward. That's when it becomes so dangerous.
Nice. Very nice. Yeah. Thank
Yes,
you.
That
I
would
do.
be my answer.
Yeah.
I do understand what you are saying. I just wanted to make sure that the first step is feeling the pain
Yeah.
and connecting.
Always.
And you made the point really clearly. I'm so glad you raised it because I've never heard an explanation of trauma as such a wonderful way that this is a healthy way of pausing so that you can get your breath and
Exactly.
kind of regather and move forward. That's wonderful, Fred. That was great.
But let me also say that I don't even know where I published this, but besides the book I wrote, the 3 preconditions to forgiveness are know what happened, know the damage, and share your pain with some people. Those are the 3 preconditions. Until you've done that, you probably shouldn't work on forgiveness. You should work on those preconditions. Herb, I
good.
can take
Glad
one
you
more
said that.
question
All right.
and then I gotta
Thank you.
go.
Thank you, Frankie. That was great. I'm sure glad you pressed that button.
Could you
Ron,
repeat those 3 things, please?
we're going to move on for just a minute. Ron, please.
Thanks, Herb. Thanks, Fred, for the workshop. It was great. Got a lot of information. I'm feeling a lot of hope after that. So thanks very much.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I just want to kind of carry a little bit of what I caught what Kai was saying about, feeling feelings. I just find it a lot easier to forgive when I'm feeling good about myself. And I think, you were talking about our perspective depends so much on whether or not we are forgiving. And a lot of times my perspective depends a lot on how I'm feeling about myself. So you were talking about how when we get up in the morning about um, doing that assets and liabilities, and maybe I've been not so mindful about that process. And I often get caught in the vortex of shame of past behaviors or fear of not being enough, trying so hard to be fabulous and push to meet all what I think I'm supposed to be doing in this life, that I start judging myself, and oftentimes it I get caught in inability, and it's easier to resent somebody or something. I find over my life than to actually look at that. And this workshop has given me, new insights, and that's the kind of the key. And so I'm just gonna give a quick story, and then I'm gonna ask for your comments. So yesterday, I came home, and this happened so recently that it's one incident that's happened that kind of connects these dots. I came home. My wife is recovering from breast cancer, and she had been to radiation treatment. And I came home, and I think, I went out and I was playing pickleball with my friends, and I probably lost a few games. I was tired, and I wasn't really feeling good about myself. I came home, uh, and there was probably other things that were happening, but I came home and we started making some lunch, and she said to me, "Well, my radiation treatments went well." And I said, "Well, I was going to get to that." And she says, "Well, you don't seem to care." And I quickly got defensive, and kind of reverted into myself for a while, and I didn't want to talk to her for the rest of the afternoon. It was like kind of sucking my thumb. I was off sucking my thumb,
Yeah, but you failed her. I mean, who cares about your thumb? You failed somebody who needed you.
Mhm. Yeah.
And if you're gonna just look at your own self so strongly, you're continuing to fail her.
Mm.
And what I was gonna say back to you before is, like, you have a bad habit of shame thoughts or self-attack thoughts. The real thing to do with habits like that is somewhere in there do the Dr. Phil question. How's that working for you? So if you had used that question, like, you have a relationship, you don't respond appropriately, like when somebody comes back from radiation, that's your first question. How did it go? So you were legitimately dinged. And then you have this whatever nonsense of self-pity and all this other stuff that took you away from being able to rectify the situation. It would have been nice to just check in. How's this working for me? It's like, I got this habit and it's really deep, but is this a good habit to carry?
Mhm.
You have to have a hook that gets you where I hear her going all the time. You have choice. And there's a helplessness that you are presenting in how you're doing this, that you don't have a lot of choice, that you have this like other voice in your head that's not actually you. But you have all sorts of choice if you decide to become aware of your process. And only you decides that. So if it were me advising you, it would be go make sure you apologize to that woman big time for neglecting her in need and behaving like such a baby when she was wounded because you didn't pay attention to the fact that she had a treatment for cancer.
Mhm.
That would be my strong, clear advice to you.
That's already done.
What's that?
That's already done.
Then you're good. That's
Good.
wonderful. That is absolute, and that's the only piece that matters.
Yeah, the piece that I was wanting to get to was, how do I do that before I got defensive about.
Takes lots of practice.
Yeah, okay.
And
Well,
as long
And
as you're
find out.
willing,
that's what I
Find
thought.
out, I have kind of a schema. One of the questions is, what am I defending?
yeah,
Yeah,
that's another good one.
get underneath it, because there's layers of story that you have. And Fred just, wow, he just got right to it very quickly and not gently. Maybe that's why we get along so well. Thank you so much, Ron.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and there was somebody was asking a question about you, Fred. Would you repeat those three things again, please? mentioned about the
Yeah,
resolution.
I'll amplify that a little bit. First is be very clear about what happened. Like, know what was done, know as much of the background as you can, understand the offense. Two, examine the damage in you to you, like, because you need to clearly know what you are forgiving. Forgiving is not the act of weakness or cowardice. It's a very strong, assertive statement to the world that this happened to me. Maybe your parents were neglectful for a decade. This is horrible. But all you need to actually know is what actually happened. Not that my father was an asshole, but what did he actually do or not do? What was the harm to you? Like, because of having those bad parents, I don't trust people. This takes work, to be honest. And then you need to share what you've known with a couple of people because you need support. You need to know you're not alone and you're not crazy. When those three simple, and they don't happen immediately. They take some time and exploration and, what is my experience of this? But once that's clear, and once you have really looked at what happened, you don't need that in the same way. But it's almost impossible to do if you haven't shared some of it. It can be too shameful or too difficult. You don't have to go broadcast it in public. You can do it to a therapist or you can do it in an anonymous group, but you have to share that piece of your wounded humanity, and then you can let it go, or at least start working to let it go.
This is the reason that I think we're so compatible in terms of our experience with the method, and that is steps 4 through 9 are exactly that, where you're getting to the exact nature of it, you're taking responsibility for your reaction to it, you're talking to somebody about it, and you're talking in the 8th and 9th step literally about all of the damage, all of the underlying impacts, etc. And now what can I do to change both my perception and the realities?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And since we're doing a book on forgiveness, we only spend 2 pages on that. But those 2 pages are essential, that if you don't have some clarity of how it's harmed you and how your life has been minimized, you don't really get into what a courageous, strong act you're doing by being willing to let it go. Herb, it was great to see you. Thank you again. Everybody, thank you for your attention and your time. Herb, I will send you as soon as I get off the links to those 2,
Right.
one video, one podcast. The podcast, I don't know anything about this, but it turns out to be, it's a very, very influential podcast, and it's been seen like altogether a couple 100,000 times already. But I think your audience will find it useful.
I really appreciate your work, and we'll schedule another one.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred, very much. So I'm still available if we have questions that I'm competent from a knowledge and experience to answer. If anybody has or comments or experiences that somebody wanted to share, we'll take a little time here. It's 12:30 here in Los Angeles. We'll go for another 5 or 10 minutes, or just pray our way to conclusion if we don't have any interaction with you folks. So you raise your hand, and I'll call on you in the order of your raised hands for a little bit. Nazel, please. Yeah.
Can you hear?
Nasli.
Yeah. Thank you so much. A wonderful couple of hours. Absolutely. Just a quick question about the podcast Dr. Locker was mentioning. Do we have that information?
No, he said he will send it to me. Excuse me. I will send it to Rainey. She'll take care of making sure all of the people here who have registered will have it. I'll be in discernment as to how best to handle it. Once I see what it is, perhaps I'll make it more broadly available.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
No, thanks for asking. That's great. Okay, so okay, one more. Joan, please. Excuse me.
I just wanted to say that my experience with forgiveness, coming into the Al-Anon in 91 it was suggested to me that I start working on forgiveness, and particularly in the case of a brother of mine. And then I wasn't in touch with anything yet. I wasn't, but I still just really took that to heart for some reason. And I began that process, and it took a long time. It took many years. But during the process, things sort of moved forward in the sense that by 2016, he had asked me to work for him. And then by the time he died in 2022, I would have never dreamt in a million years that our relationship would be what it was.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Never in a million years would I ever have dreamt that. I was going to hold on to that anger and resentment for the rest of my life.
And I say it all the time. Number one is I can't get here from there, and yet here we are. All right.
And that was without psychological understanding of myself, others, or anything.
But it took a long time, and it doesn't
took a
have to
long
take so
time.
long. It doesn't have to
really
take
long.
so long. That's why Fred and I are doing the work we're doing to try to expedite it so that people can reduce their suffering more quickly. So I say, lean gently into it, whatever it is you're doing for your own personal development, lean gently. You heard him, no violence here. Lean gently into it, and then be willing to be surprised.
Well, I was surprised. And I have others. I mean, I'm here because I have others that I need to go through the process with.
Exactly.
All right. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Bob, of course. Hello, Bob.
You're not getting away without a comment.
I felt the lasso. I felt the lasso.
Welcome back from across the pond. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Yeah.
And Fred extolled that he recommended that we breathe deep and say thank you. So thank you, Herb, for just improving my life in a huge way. I can't thank you enough.
And you know what my response is? The way we express our gratitude is we pass it forward to somebody else. What we got. Not you. Don't try to be Herb. Try to be Bob.
Well, last night I decided to put two and two together, and I thought that the bars on that page you show us are made of Fred Luskin's rules.
The unenforceable rules.
The unenforceable rules.
That's exactly it. That's right.
This was well received in a meeting, and a bunch of high school age kids who were in there on a field trip or something, I'm not sure, rushed me and said, what was that term again? Unenforceable rules? And I said, it's not mine. It's Dr. Fred Luskin's from Forgive for Good. And they jotted it down. And I said, the bars come from Herb K.
Well, but see, that's passing it forward. You're giving them information and vocabulary and metaphors and images that you have no idea, they have no idea how that's going to flower.
I'll tell you something you gave me, you, the spirit of the universe, I don't know who, but when you tell your people when they get started to start a 10 and 11 practice immediately, that is the smartest thing I've ever heard, because every morning I have to check off. Imagine whom you will be in contact with. Ask to be reminded. to treat them with kindness and love. And then I've added, visualize them in a kind and loving manner. I do so much better at work now, you cannot imagine.
No, I can't, and neither can you. That's right. No, you can't imagine where this will deliver you. Absolutely. That's why I'm so dedicated to it. It's miracle stuff. I mean, I don't use that word lightly. All right. Let's pray then. This prayer of, thank you very much, Bob. This prayer of St. Francis. This is the prayer of transformation, a prayer for freedom, a prayer for healing, a prayer for the turning that is promised in the 12-step process. Spirit of the universe, make me a channel of your peace. That where there is hatred, I bring love. That where there is wrong, I bring the spirit of forgiveness. That where there is discord, I bring harmony. That where there is error, I bring truth. That where there's doubt, I bring faith. That where there's despair, I bring hope. That where there is shadow, I bring light. That where there is sadness, I bring joy. Grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to this life. Amen. Thank you, everybody.